Commission meeting to order. We don't need to review the Zoom procedures, but since Sean's online, Sean, can you just identify yourself real quickly?
Sean Linehan, Planning Commissioner.
Thanks, Sean. Next is approval of the agenda. This slipped past me when I looked at the agenda earlier, but I'd like to suggest we move general business up to after number 3, so between the third and fourth agenda items. That makes sense to folks.
Yes.
Okay. Since we got a change out there, uh, looking for a motion. Perfect. We got a motion. We got a motion. We got a second. Seconded by Tim. All those in favor to approve the agenda with the change?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next is consideration of the March 23rd minutes. Take a minute to look those over. Right, unless anybody has any suggested changes or revisions to the minutes, I'd ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes. Hearing nothing, the minutes are approved. Next is general business. This is comments from the public about something not on the agenda. Do we have anybody who wants to say anything?
Steve Whitaker. I don't have prepared remarks, but I'm interested to hear how, if any, discussion went on around y'all's needing to convene and have address the open meeting violation. And I see no minutes or warnings of a special meeting. I see no response, and it's not it's the chair's obligation to convene a meeting. It's not the chair's prerogative to deny the allegation unilaterally. So the whole commission needs to deal with that. But I'm not going to give you legal advice. Secondly, the Country Club Road process is recognizing that they don't have a good choice to make. They've disqualified one, but the other 3 are pretty much disqualified by not meeting the needs of the city. Part of that responsibility lies in this room because it's this commission that's supposed to have defined the needs of the city such that the developers could respond to it. And somehow y'all were talked out of it or told that it wasn't your jurisdiction, but it is. And so we should do some contingency planning of what do we do if no selection is made or the court invalidates the whole process. And what's necessary is for the planning commission to recognize the need to put a country club road master plan together and find or ask the city council to find some money to get you some expert help in doing that. But there's no way that any developer is going to get a permit to only build housing up there if the rest of the program, meaning the civic buildings, the recreation, the emergency resilience, all of that isn't defined and specified for how much traffic it's going to generate, because nobody gets a permit until traffic is addressed. And so it's kind of like the negligence leading up to this point is starting to hit a critical point, but we need to think about how are we going to get a master plan done, in what order are we going to get the brownfield remediated, and where is Turtle Island going to go during that? Because that's not a coexistent. You can't leave a bunch of children there while trucks are digging up toxic soil and driving it right by their play yard. So this is all discussion that hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened because the planning commission failed to do its job with a country club road plan. All that the city plan that you adopted says is like, implement the actionable plan. And the actionable plan is not incorporated by reference. It has no legal bearing on the city plan. And Miller didn't tell you when he brought it back from remand from the city council that the planning, phase 2 planning, which had been in the actionable plan, was revoked by his May 20 memo, claiming it had already been revoked by the city council, which there's no evidence of. So we've got a very complicated, convoluted process here, but ultimately the buck stops here with who's responsible for. I wouldn't say y'all are going to become landscape architects and utility engineers, but you need to recognize that you need to shepherd that process and manage the public engagement part and manage the budgetary part that gets expert help hired to do it. It's clear that we don't have that expertise in city government. So I'm giving you the heads up because I think the sooner we think about that, the sooner you could give advice about capacity and timing to the Country Club Road Subcommittee and the City Council. But DEW does not have any financial wherewithal to do this, and they've admitted they don't even have a plan. They're waiting to have site control before they'll start writing a plan. Similarly, Chinburg would just extract $10 million off the top into New Hampshire if they were given the master contract. And Eric Chinburg has said this project is not big enough for a master developer with multiple developers underneath. We need to be thinking about that with regard to the rest of the town. We need to be thinking about how to develop developer capacity, not just have truckloads of people come in and take their paychecks and go home to New Hampshire on Friday. You know, that's an extractive model that we can't afford. So we have to really think through what we want for Country Club Road, because it is going to be our biggest development, but realistically, it's not going to start for 3 or 4 years. And it's likelihood that both the build grant and the CDBG grant will not come through, and possibly we won't pass environmental clearance on the Northern Borders grant. If we could ask the Northern Borders Commission to repurpose that grant into a planning grant, that might be our smartest solution, because there isn't extra money, laying around. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Next is comments from the commission. I'll start it off really quickly just by responding to something that Steve raised in his comments. Oh,
So Peter has his hand up.
oh, I'm sorry,
Comments.
Peter.
Sorry, I thought there were more people there.
No,
Comment.
it's all you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just raised it just a moment, this moment, because I was waiting. You didn't miss me. So are we gonna have an opportunity to talk later when you're taking things up, or is this it for public comment?
I mean, I think we're probably, I mean, I think according to the agenda, this would be the time to raise whatever issue you want to. I mean, we'll take up maybe public comments later, but
Okay, all
the
right.
idea is to do it now.
All right, well, so the first thing I want to say uncharacteristically is I think your guiding principles are fantastic. I know you're used to hearing me be critical, but I think they're fantastic. And I hope you will dedicate yourselves to sticking with it and being in control. Uh, the Planning Commission has at times let the planning department control it, but the staff of the planning department is supposed to be supporting you, supporting what you think is the right thing to do. That's why you were appointed by the city council. And so I just urge you to stay in charge. And when you're told that staff has recommended something, I think you should ask who staff is. There's only three possible people. And, Mike likes to say, this is staff. Well, it's either him or Meredith or Josh. And I think you should ask who's recommending this? Who's saying this? And anyway, the other thing I want to say is that this redlining stuff, first of all, I urge you, all of you, every committee, to stop using that term. That is a revolting term that was used as a process to discriminate against people of color starting in the 1930s right up through the 1970s. Call it strike through or something else. Redlining it gives me the shivers when I hear it, and I'm white. Can you imagine how it makes a person of color feel? I know this isn't your fault, but I think you can ask Mike to stop calling it redlining. But I have a substantive concern about going through, the documents, line by line by line, and kind of looking at a document that's got all these strike throughs. I don't know about you, but I can't read those. I can't make any sense out of them. It's fine to have them, but have a version that you can do this with Google Docs, right? Have a version that shows what it will actually look like without the original, without the strike throughs. And otherwise, I've seen too often, even the city council vote to approve something that I know they can't read. So tell Mike you want to see what it actually will look like if those strike throughs are carried out. And finally, I just want to say that I think it's a very good idea to have more things be done by administrative decision. However, understand that Meredith, for example, is a lawyer. She will make a decision, but only if she's permitted to. And so the less restrictive, I know in some ways I'm preaching to the choir, but the less restrictive the zoning rules are, the more Meredith will be able to rule that a project can proceed. I've mentioned this before, but I saw an example when Cody Chevrolet needed to replace their sign. And it should have been an administrative decision. And Meredith could have said, yeah, go ahead, fine. But it wasn't an administrative decision, and she wasn't able to do that. Well, you've got to make sure that Meredith or whoever is in that position as zoning administrator has a lot of leeway and that understands that the spirit of what we're trying to do is to simplify the regulatory process so it doesn't drive developers away, and so it doesn't allow neighborhoods to create exclusionary NIMBY neighborhoods. Those are the two things I think that we all agree need to have happen. But in order for that to happen, you've got to make sure that the zoning administrator really has the tools to make those administrative decisions. And then finally, I didn't see any mention of infill, but I have to tell you, and again, I know I'm preaching to the converted, but I think it needs to be brought to the surface. When Josh Jerome came on board, I can't even remember when it was now, 2017 or 2018, maybe 2019, I can't remember. When he came on board, I talked to him, I think almost on his first day of the job, and I talked to him about infill. I said, there's so many opportunities for infill in the city, but we can't do it because nobody is helping little people like, property owners to know how to do it, how to either subdivide or how to subdivide their big Victorian buildings into multiple family housing or multi-generational housing. And Josh nodded and he said, yes, infill is the low-hanging fruit. Well, guess what? Nothing happened in his entire time here about that. I'm not blaming him. But once again, I'm hearing people say, oh, yes, infill is the low-hanging fruit. It's only the low-hanging fruit if a real program, an infill program that is supported and carried out by the planning department that helps people know how to do it. Because we're not talking about developers. When I've gone in to try to do a small project, into the planning office, I've been told, go get an architect to draw up some plans. Go get an engineer. Well, spend money before we even give you any help on knowing whether or not this is something you will be able to do. And I've had to abandon 4 different projects because of that. And that's just me. And I multiply me times 100. Okay, thanks, guys and gals.
Thanks, Peter. Also, it looks like Alan, do you have something you want to say?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. And I would echo Peter's comments about your guiding principles for planning. I think they look great. Thank you. And the only thing I'm going to speak to is process. If you look at, there's probably only 4 or 5 of us who are from the public who are here. The rest of you are part of the team that so faithfully donates your time. I would please ask that you keep the process open for open dialogue. I don't think the 4 or 5 of us are going to interrupt your evening. So if you do discuss something tonight that seems relevant and germane, I would like to be able to discuss it at that moment. I feel so constrained when I have to give you all of my thoughts and opinions in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then I just sit here for hours and not able to participate. So I hope you'll consider that as long as we're polite and respectful of your time. I think I've rarely spoken, and so that would be my comment. And I want to thank you, Peter, for all your excellent comments every night. And Steve and all the people that show up. If you look on the board right now, there's about 6 of us who come to every single meeting. Thank you. And again, I want to thank all you volunteers for what you do. I too was a planning commissioner. It is not easy. It is frequently not a job where you're thanked, but I'm thanking you and we're looking forward to working. Thank you, folks.
Aaron,
Sure.
I just want to, folks that aren't aware, there is a state program helping people that want to try to figure out how to develop their land. They're doing 1-day classes and they're doing a whole academy. So if people need that, and they'll provide technical support. So there's a state program that's helping with that now.
Great. Thanks, Gabe. Alan, are you done? Because your virtual hand is still up, but
Actually, I put it back up because
Okay.
there was no answer. I just didn't know. So may I respectfully, without being disrespectful, ask a question or maybe participate at some point for a very limited amount of time? Or I just don't want to sit here for 2 hours and not be able to speak.
sure. I mean, I think I'm in favor of, if you have a comment or a question while we're in a specific agenda item that's germane to that, feel free to raise your hand, and I would imagine we will, entertain that. I mean,
Thank you, Chair.
Thank
Thank you very
I mean,
much.
I feel fine about that.
And Aaron,
Yeah.
that item on the agenda is specifically
Right.
not on the agenda. So
Right.
the theory is because it's a public meeting
Right. So
that they can talk at other points.
yeah.
They just have to get your approval. That's all.
Yes, but we've been trying to make it, we've made it quite clear at city council, we were trying a new process. And I appreciate if the planning chair and the planning commission would allow us to participate. And if we feel like we're taking too long, let us know. But you've seen my name up there many nights. I rarely say anything. So I hope you folks have a good night.
Certainly. Thank you. Okay. Next up is comments from the commission. I just wanted to speak to something that Steve raised in his comments, which was a couple of weeks ago, Steve sent me and some other folks. I don't think anybody else from the commission got this email, but he raised an allegation of a violation of the open meeting law, alleging that under the open meeting law, there needs to be the relevant committee, in this case, the planning commission, is obligated to post their minutes on their website. And he alleged that they hadn't been posted on there since April of 2019. And there was also a companion public records request to get all the meeting minutes from that time forward. I ended up speaking with some folks in town. They assured me that there was no violation of the open meeting law, that those minutes were posted on the website consistent with the open meeting law. Under the open meeting law, a not responding to the alleged violation is tantamount to the denial of the violation. So because of the communications I had with city staff, I decided to not respond to it. With that being said, if this group feels that there needs to be further discussion of this, we can have a special meeting about that. You don't have to tell me right now, but if if two or more other planning commissioners feel that we need to warn a new meeting, I'll do that. But in this instance, I decided not to. It was in that pretty long 3-week lull. So that's why I decided to just not warn a special meeting on that, because I didn't think it was warranted. Hi, Sean.
All right. If you're done, Aaron, I have something other to comment on.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. I just wanted to give a quick summary of my experience with the CCR subcommittee since I've been attending their meetings. And you probably know that Penrose was rejected. They have it down to 3. My impression from these meetings is not so much that the committee doesn't see a viable option there, but that they have a lot of information to pore over. This is not necessarily any one of their areas of expertise, and they want to take the time to make the right decision. Also, they have requested some more changes to the proposals, and they want to give the developers a chance to respond to those requests before they make a choice. It seems to me that they want this to go before the full council in maybe 6 weeks. So rather than April 22nd, probably early June to make a selection.
Quick question, Sean. Is there going to be an opportunity for public input or input from the commission based on the changes that they're asking the developers to undertake before it goes to full city council?
That's a good question. And I would say that right now it's not entirely clear. There will be another subcommittee meeting this week, so maybe find out more. I think that we will certainly have an opportunity to give input because I'll be keeping tabs on things. I don't know about uh, a public meeting like they did for that Thursday night. That was I don't know if they'll do that again.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
Sure. Aaron and Marie and I met with some housing committee members last week. It was a sort of an add-on to their original meeting with Alyssa Sharon, who's chairing the housing committee, and Tim Heaney and Sandy Fitzhugh were there as well. And it was really productive. They brought me in as the liaison to the housing committee, and I'll continue tracking along as we go forward. They are really pushing on multiple fronts. I'll just mention a few things that they've worked on through March. Some are ongoing, some are paused, and some were successful. They were trying at a legislature level to push statewide appeals revisions. That did not get picked up, so hope maybe potentially next year. They were instrumental in helping with the local sprinkler ordinance that was put in front of the city council. That went through last week, where the city is going to make our sprinkler ordinances align with the state regulations instead of having our own separate regulations. They did their own country club review, and yeah, a handful of other things. They updated their tax stabilization policy approach, and they've adopted the state version there. So a lot of different fronts. They had a developer meeting last Monday or Tuesday evening. I was there. Gabe was there. I think Sean was online. We were mostly listening along, and it was really helpful to hear. I'll say one of the things that stuck with me was James Moore was talking a lot about the development fees that are needed through the city, and it's extremely costly. I think his number for one of his projects so far is about $10,000 to $15,000, and where that can be reduced, it's hugely helpful for getting housing going. I think I wanted to mention a couple of things that the committee members mentioned that when it comes to zoning regulations that I thought was very interesting and creative proposals. One of them was if and where we are overlapping with state regulations, that we could potentially strip them from city regulations instead of having a duplicative an overlap there between state and city. I asked what an example of that would be. And one of them was steep slopes that they had mentioned is something that the state reviews as well. Well, okay. Let me just pause there and say that was an interesting proposal. Where there is a state review and a city review, we could potentially remove from city regs. And I'll just leave it at that for now. I'm not versed well enough in what those overlaps are, so I'll just pause and leave it at that. The other one was the idea that when we're looking at dimensional standards, is, instead of maybe approaching it from the direction of this is what we have currently, what do we want it to be in the future? They floated an idea of a priority housing overlay district. It could cover all of our res districts, where anything commercial in that space would still comply with setbacks, FAR, et cetera. But a very creative idea of starting from zero when it comes to residential. If we want housing built and we want to incentivize housing built in the city, that is a very restrictive space. So what if we started with no dimensional standards and sort of built up from there? Again,
So a dimensional, not just density?
dimensional, height, setbacks, density, with the idea of it as a very creative brainstorming space for us to approach this. Instead of saying, well, this particular setback is 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet within this residential district, what if we started from zero and built up from there? just a creative idea. I'm bringing it as inspiration for us to consider as we go through the regulations. And I'll say one last thing, which was um, there was a comment about our flood zone regulations, and a lot of that, in their opinion, is covered by FEMA. So another possibility of an overlap with another regulatory body. All right, I'm going to pause there. It's okay. It was a very productive meeting.
Any questions for Tim?
Well, I do have one question, sorry. Well, not sorry, but I do have a question. So did you say the Housing Commission also, or the Housing Committee also kind of had a meeting with developers, or sort of did maybe?
They did.
What I'm interpreting as like a similar exercise to what we did. Did they have recommendations? I'm just curious where their thoughts were to kind of compare it to what our thoughts were.
The developers, from developer perspective,
The housing
committee wasn't really speaking much during that session. That was really an opportunity for developers to give their feedback,
Okay.
for the housing committee to inspire their work.
Has the housing committee done some type of similar exercise to what we did in terms of analyzing the different developers' proposals?
Oh, for Country Club Road?
Yes.
They say that they have in their document, but we didn't get into that. So I'd be curious to see if they have written feedback.
Okay.
If we could review that would be good. Anything I missed or anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, they did have this idea to separate housing zoning from the rest of zoning, which like, I don't know necessarily what that means.
I think that was the idea of like the priority housing overlay district, where like res could remain as it is, but where there is housing in those districts, that it gets separated.
Yeah.
I believe.
I know, I think that's what I have in my notes. How about Aaron? Do you remember anything else?
No, I have nothing to add. No. Yeah, and Tim was made sure, I'll just say this, Tim made sure to say that he wanted to, still continue to be in contact with them and continue that that relationship so that we can really keep tabs on what they're doing and find ways to interact where that makes sense. So thanks, Tim, and thanks, Sean, for the Country Club Road work. So anything else from commissioners or?
I could just comment on the first and third. The second one is one to talk about. So duplicative rules with the state, we've done a very good job of matching ours to state. So in a lot of places in there, you'll find like with wetlands and these other places where there is a state permit, it says if you get a state permit, you're exempt from the local permit. But there are instances where our rules are stricter, like with wetlands, we regulate vernal pools. So so you wouldn't need a state permit for those, but in the other ones you would. And so where there are overlaps, where we've noted them, stormwater management. If you're getting a state stormwater permit, you don't need to do our stormwater rules because you're already complying, because our rules are meant to dovetail with theirs. But the state rules only start at 20,000 square feet. So anyone with less than 20,000 square feet isn't regulated. So the question for I think currently it's whatever, 10,000 square feet.
It depends if you're in the combined sewer and stormwater, or if they've been separated in controls by the city.
Yeah, but they're just different rules that we would, but we have already addressed a lot of that. If there are areas we've missed, certainly that's one, but we have addressed a lot of the duplicative rules. And the FEMA doesn't regulate floodplains. The requirement to be in NFIP is that we agree to do the regulation. So we have to do the regulations in order to be eligible for FEMA. If we didn't, then we wouldn't be eligible for any of the FEMA programs. So we have to, the regulations are expected that we manage them. So, but the second point is one we'd have to get more details on to talk about, but.
Alan, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, quickly, I'll just speak to that. As Doug and I worked on savings, the two that we overlapped were wetland and traffic. Our regs say to go by a 25-year storm event, and the state is saying to go by 100. And also, we did not line up with the AOT. And so, as Mike also mentioned, the vernal pools. But the other two were quite large, and it really does make sense to follow the state's guide. Thank you.
Is it very obvious for developers when they are getting into addressing wetlands, for instance, where they need to go and how that gets addressed?
Are you asking me, sir?
Well, I'm putting it out there.
I mean, I can certainly speak for myself. Yes, most of us are well aware. The state has class 1, class 2. Michael spoke to the vernal pool. Vernal pools are a class 2 wetland structure that typically have a 50-foot setback. And based on some old work by Brent Engstrom, which I was part of in 2010, we have a 500-foot setback. So it's 10 times the state's setback for a vernal pool.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the requirement that we have anytime we issue permits is that it's on our permits, and we advise anyone who has something that could potentially affect it is to contact the state. And we used to be able to say just contact the state permit specialist. I don't think we have a state permit specialist anymore, but we have a process for telling people it is the developer's responsibility to identify state permits. We don't get into that, because if we give you any advice that turns out to not be correct, then people point the finger at us. So our job is to say, check with the state, and the state will go through and tell you whether or not you need any state permits. But as I said, usually we kind of know where things are going. The certain ones we would expect the wetlands and those types of requirements.
That would be one reason to potentially make sure that instead of having our own wetlands and vernal pools map, we tie it to the state map.
Sure.
Right. That's one way to help reduce some of the potential conflicts or duplicative controls with different standards.
That makes sense.
Any other comments from folks? Nope. All right, moving on. Next agenda item is the review of the introductory liaison form letter to committees and commissions. And this was Maria's fine work, so I'll let her speak to this.
Piggyback off what Sean wrote to the Country Club Road Subcommittee. I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The idea is to introduce yourself, explain that we are doing this across all the different committees, and make yourself available for them if they have questions or if they wanted to talk. I'm open to any edits, or we could just approve this, and if it's approved today, we can just send out our emails. Aaron? This is your process.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just, is there a motion to approve this then and use it?
Well, if anyone has any edits.
Yeah, I mean, we can.
So.
Because that's the first question. If there's any.
I'm looking at my emails right now. Do you remember when you sent it?
We have copies.
It's
Oh.
yeah, it's gonna
Floating.
Okay.
It's not
One
very
moment,
long.
please.
Take a minute to look it up.
Oh.
We're adjusting this. It's hot.
Good job.
That's good. All right. Any other edit? No?
No, it's good. I would, if we should make a
Motion
motion.
I mean, we can. I don't honestly. I don't think it's. I don't think
necessary.
it's really an action,
Okay.
you know, it's not really an action. If people feel comfortable with this, feel free to use it. I would encourage you to do so. I do think it does a very good job of outlining what it's for and everything, and you know, and it does it in a very concise and eloquent way. So, so yeah, if those commission members that haven't reached out to their respective sort of city committees, feel free to reach out to them, and hopefully it will yield benefit to us all. So, thank you. The next agenda item is the review. I'm sorry, it's a regulation revision process discussion. So, I sent out an email earlier today to folks. I apologize for doing that this morning. I had meant to do it on Friday and I completely blanked on it, so I picked it up this morning and realized I hadn't done it. So, I don't know if this is going to spur a real productive discussion today, but I wanted to sort of put a marker out there early in this process, which is we are in a very fortunate position here in Montpelier as the Planning Commission to have city staff, very skilled professional staff that are willing to work with us and work with us very well, and quite frankly, do the majority of the sort of nitty gritty work that we ask them to do. And so, you know, again, it has been extremely helpful and we are very lucky to have that, you know, at various levels. At least during my tenure, traditionally, how we have approached revising any sort of documents, whether it be very specific sort of zoning requests or changes to the zoning regulations, is it is largely driven by city staff. We will typically get a revised, a strike-through version of you know, a document that shows proposed revisions, and that we typically sort of have discussions around those revisions as they're presented to us. And that has generally worked well. That being said, given the scope and scale of this project that we're undertaking in terms of the sort of front to back revision of the zoning regulations, I wanted to have and this sort of piggybacks on what we've done with the guiding principles. And I think that was a really good exercise in order for us to establish what sort of our guiding principles are, so that we are all moving in the right direction in terms of establishing what we want to achieve through this project. But I think we also need to take a look and see how do we want to, what process we want to implement in order to execute this. And that is to say, should there be a different process? Should we be looking at this a little more holistically out of the gate, figure out processes to identify certain areas that we wanted to do, or just have a general discussion about how we want to go about making these revisions, as opposed to just diving straight in with sort of these line item revisions that we would typically get from city staff. I don't have a specific recommendation with respect to that. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I wanted to sort of open the floor for folks to sort of have a brainstorming session to see what might be the best way to do that. And I'm not suggesting that we absolutely have to move away from what we have been doing in the past, but I at least want to have this discussion now, as opposed to, you know, get 3, 4, 5 sessions down the road in this process. And, you know, if there's, you know, and suddenly that's just the way we're going to do it. So, with that, I would just sort of open the floor to see if folks have any ideas about process. I will say I'm not very good at like a project management. So I'm not, you know, I'm hoping that folks have a better sense of like what processes might be appropriate here, because it's just not my strong suit. So
And I like the process that we followed. I think there's some other ideas out there. You know, Housing Committee has some other ideas, and I know people have been engaged with them. I do think that whatever we do is, we just heard like just in a couple little reports of anecdotal, like, hey, what about this and that? If we don't have a strike through version, we maybe ought to have a version of, here's comments from the staff that there's a reason that this is in here. Like, we need to have this if we want to have a designated downtown. We need to have this to comply with some certain regulation. Because I feel like we could, without that, even though we could have all kinds of great ideas, we might just be spinning our wheels only to come in and find out that, oh no, there's a reason that stuff is there.
Yeah, I agree. And that's sort of what's kind of driving this discussion from, this is why I want to spur this discussion is I feel like there are so many moving parts within the existing zoning regulations, that we're absolutely going to require Meredith and Mike's expertise in order to make sure that we are not stripping out things that we shouldn't and things of that nature. But I was thinking more along the lines of how do we, what sort of processes do we want to sort of maybe try in order to ensure that these principles, as we've articulated them apparently fairly well, because people have told us, how do we make that a reality? And how do we ensure that those principles rise to the top of this document and really come through? And yeah.
So I keep going back to the zoning map. I've talked to you about this before, but I feel like everyone has these ideas about we need to simplify and we need to make it better, easier to build housing. But then like I think this is like when the rubber meets the road is like right here, you know, because all of the setbacks issues, conditional uses, it all works within this framework. And I think adjusting this framework first, and then visiting all of the different dimensional standards and uses for the new districts that we come up with makes a lot more sense than I think we could spin wheels for a long time if we don't do that. But I also think it's kind of funny. I keep talking to lay people about changing the zoning code, and everyone's like, "Yeah, do it." And then I'm like, "Oh, so what do you think the district should be? What do you think the new zoning district should be?" And they just look at me like all joy like leaves their face, you know. But I think this is like the nitty-gritty work that we need to do to kick off this review. And I think that alone might also prompt some feedback from people, from the public and from the planning department. But I do feel like this is the critical map. So I think to me, that's a good place to start. And it's a good place to highlight all of these guiding principles that we've gone through. Like, what does that mean in practice? And we can try that out just by looking at the zoning map. But I am also open to other ideas. Oh, Sean has his hand up.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I agree with Maria about where to start. And based on your description, Aaron, of mostly basing your stuff off of staff recommendations, I would much prefer to see some sort of hybrid of that in this process where we all have something to bring to the table, ideas, people, ideas from outside of the Planning Commission as well, that I would like to see get integrated into this discussion. And obviously, still listening to staff. One of the things you said in your email earlier is like, do we want to throw everything out and start from scratch? And I think Maria was saying no, and I agree with that. It's not necessary. And Gabe was saying that too. It sounded like that, chapter 1, I think we've agreed is going to be, not that many changes, but chapter 2, the map, our districts, we've got a lot to consider with that. And I would like to hear everybody's thoughts on that. That's all I have.
I like the hybrid approach. I think that instead of simply taking the spreadsheet, the list, the matrix from the planning department and saying yes or no to that, I think that there's an opportunity for us to have a more creative, more brainstorming process to not necessarily start from scratch and flip this thing completely on its head, but to really think about what we want this city to look like, what we can imagine the city look like, what we can imagine our community of friends and family want the city to look like in 20, 30 years. Even if we made drastic changes, even if and when we make drastic changes to the zoning regulations, none of this will happen rapidly. It doesn't, it will still take many, many, many years for any sort of transformational housing development to happen in the city. So I'm thinking very broadly, very sort of holistically. And I think it involves a little bit more creative discussion with help from the planning department and setting guides, as Gabe mentioned, or some parameters, super helpful. But yeah, so I'm saying yes to the hybrid approach.
But yeah, Ron, you look like you want to say something.
I mean, is that, what is the hybrid approach?
Where it's not simply going through the matrix and saying yes or no,
Yeah.
and being fully led by recommendations from the planning department and having simply discussions based off of that, but also bringing larger ideas from ourselves, from the community, that potentially goes beyond what we see in the matrices. That's what I'm imagining a hybrid approach being.
I think that's a great idea. I'm kind of thinking through Maria's suggestion of kind of starting with the map itself.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where my lack of piping up is in, because that's a very interesting idea that I hadn't have considered, and it's a very compelling point and something I would be open to trying. And then if that wasn't an approach that was getting us maybe the results that we thought it would, then moving towards focusing on the regulations themselves and the matrix and the hybrid approach, I guess. Because my thinking was that Maria's suggestion was separate was the starting point, and then the hybrid approach would come after. Those are my thoughts.
I would concur with that assessment, honestly. And I think the reason for that is I'm a visual learner. And so I love the map. I love looking at the map. But I also think it would be really good to level set with the public in that sense, because I think when we see a map, we're able to say, okay, this is the area we're actually talking about. And then when we go through, we'll understand, I think it'll be clearer, at least for me, to understand whether what we're saying yes or no to, and where it's actually going to impact us in the town. So I like the approach, essentially, is what I'm saying. I think bringing in outside perspectives, if they're there, is a great idea. It provides for more community input and then more support at the end of the day, too.
Ray, do you have like a little more, can you put a little more meat on the bones of this idea in terms of how we might actually implement it?
Yeah, well, I think we just look at the map together and we come up with a new map. It's like what I'm thinking, because right now we have 14 districts. And like, what would this map look like if it was 6 districts? Like, what do we actually think is the different uses of this city and where they belong, and what they look like? Like I think it's like a lot of work actually to do that.
Yeah.
And to like really think through like, okay, what could the city look like in 30 years? Because that's what you're deciding. Like, where is the commercial? Where is residential? Where is like large lawn residential? Where is little lawn residential? Where are we filling up streets to the sidewalk? You know, those are all, this is like what this map dictates.
Mhm.
Aside, you know, obviously like the whole financial part of it is different, not our lane. But where do things go?
If I may, just for clarification, it says zoning districts 2024 on this map. Does that mean this was the last time these were updated? Okay, thank
They're-
you.
Yes, okay.
When were the zoning districts first put into place and how many times has it been updated since then?
So these were part of the 2017, which was basically approved January 5th of 2018. Was when we did the last major overhaul where we removed those and came to the new regulations. Since then, for map revisions, maybe we've made 5 or so. They're all been relatively small, always kind of at an edge where the car wash and apartments at the end of Pioneer Street. I think we shifted them from one district to another. And we had, so there a lot of those little kind of tweaky things that were in there. There was a property up on Northfield Street that once it got subdivided, it was still part of it was still part of National Life. So it was still part of that large district over there, but really the building fit with everything else on Northfield Street. So it wanted to be rezoned to what it was on Northfield Street. So a lot of these have been kind of smaller items, but we have gone through a number, probably, I guess 5 or 6 times we've amended this map, I would think, if I were to go back and count them.
Thank you.
I was gonna say since 2024, Country Club Road has been added into here. So 9.9 and 12.1, as I understand, are revisions since 2024.
Yes.
I think in this process, if I may.
You
Mhm.
gotta do your mic.
The mic's not over there, the mic's just gonna help remotely, so she just has to speak up
Yeah,
for you to hear.
it does come into the mic, into the speaker.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think in this process, it would be helpful to learn a little bit more about the past and without making anyone's life too difficult, to learn a little bit more, not just since 2018, but before then, to really understand why these zoning districts were put into place, if we could understand what the thinking was behind it, because things have changed. And I think in order to, if we're going to make updates and reduce the number of districts, then we need to understand why were they created in the first place and what are realistically the changes we want to be making and the reasons behind those. And what do we want the state to look like in 30 years, like you said. But I don't want to make anyone's life too terribly difficult either. So,
Mike, was the 2017 revision when the city, I just got louder, kind of like rewrote the zoning code so that it reflected what the city currently looked like?
Yeah.
Because there used to be some old zoning code that was,
Yes. So when I got here, I started in 2014. So when I got here, they were already in the midst of the zoning update. So they had already been into it for at least for a year or more. And so we already had a separate consultant on board. And one of the things that she did, and one of the things I thought she did well, was to go through and break the city down into its component pieces, smaller pieces, and then start to make neighborhoods and use those neighborhoods to then go in carefully and look at each one to say, all right, what is the minimum lot size? What is the setbacks and all these pieces? So that way we could go through street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, and make sure that our regulations would allow us to build what exists today. And so prior to 2018, a lot of our neighborhoods in zoning districts had 68, 70% non-conforming. The parcels were not conforming, the buildings were non-conforming, so that meant a lot more additional reviews. And so there was just a lot that went into it. And we said it doesn't make sense unless you look at your neighborhood and say that's terrible, we never want that to happen again. The goal was to say, hey, if you love your neighborhood, you have to change. Now, what that meant was upzoning, making things denser, making setbacks smaller. But we were able to get that passed with a lot of opposition, but we were able to get that passed basically by saying, yeah, but this is what your neighborhood is. We've made this match what exists on the ground. If you like your neighborhood, you should like this zoning because it matches what's on the ground. How that changed, as Maria pointed out, is, you know, and others, it wasn't forward looking as going and saying, okay, well, what is it we want to see in the future? And is our zoning allowing us to make it to the future? Well, 2018 was that step that said, okay, what do we think? Let's at least get to the point where if a neighborhood was destroyed, we could build it right back without a big deal, because it would, all the regulations would say you can build that. So basically, there's a 90% rule is what we used. So you might find one or two buildings on a street or something that's still non-conforming. But for the most part, we followed a 90% rule, and we applied it consistently across the city. And it mostly was adopted. The Town Hill area kind of fought and successfully kept themselves from meeting that, but then they were forced through with the Home Act, basically said, sorry, you're no longer allowed to be non-conforming, you've got to be conforming, and in they came. And I'll also point out, getting a little bit back to your question on history, there were a few places where staff planning commission recommendations were not, or were just the city council made a different decision. Alan and Doug are here, and you know, but just to point out, the Sabins pasture what had a different proposal. The planning commission made a proposal that said zone the entire area residential 6,000, and city council said no, we want to see it as two zoning districts, one which emphasized the development at the lower pasture and keeping the upper pasture in rural. We can go back and revisit some of these decisions that were made at that time. And certainly we'll work with Doug and Alan to talk about what their objectives are to make sure that the new zoning will match up with what future objectives they may have. But just to go through and give a little bit of a history of, that's where the districts kind of came out. And then we would make neighborhoods and then kind of go through and say, a bunch of these match up for 3,000 square foot lots, and a bunch of these match up for, you know, we chose those numbers because that actually just happened to be where the numbers kind of fell, and we didn't try to force it into that. And at the time, the numbers, res 6, res 9, res 1500, they were just meant to be placeholders, and we never got around to finding a way of coming up with new names. The old zoning before this had high density residential, low density residential, medium density residential, Central Business District 1, Central Business District 2, and names like that. They kind of had names to them as opposed to. So maybe if we get things smaller again, maybe we go back to having high density, medium density, low density residential, because we've got it down in place. But a decision for another day. Peter.
Oh, so I think the hybrid idea you're talking about is a very interesting one. Let me make a couple suggestions, which is think of it as a mirror. Staff is going to come up with suggestions like they have historically for you to react to, and you're going to come up with suggestions, that this is the new part, for them to react to, because you do want to know if there's something about what you're suggesting that is going to create problems that you weren't aware of, that staff can say, well, here's the problem with that. Similarly, but in both cases, what I was cautioning about my initial comments was staff is here to help implement a revision that reflects the new reality that is embodied in your principles. Now that's what has changed. What in 2018, 2017 revision, there was a different goal that Mike just explained, but that goal actually froze neighborhoods in the way that they were in the 90% rule. And I think it's pretty clear that the freezing of neighborhoods is one of the things that is made it difficult to do infill, for example. So I think that your principles, it's going to be important for the staff to, when they say, yes, but, they need to say, yes, here's the problem. Let's figure out a way to address that problem so that what you're trying to accomplish in your recommendation will in fact be able to be done. Not just simply say, no, you can't do that because of FEMA. You know, otherwise we won't get the insurance. Okay, Mike, that's okay. I got it. Now, so what can we do so that our hands aren't, so that every time anybody in the flood zone wants to do anything in their building, they have to meet all of these, they have to jump all of these hurdles. So I think working together in a hybrid model, going both ways is important. Staff needs to explain to you why something is problematic or why they're recommending this, and you need to explain to them, yes, but this is what we're trying to accomplish. Help us to figure out how to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Quick question, Mike. Maybe I misheard you, but it sounded like in 2017, 2018, the change to the map came on the back end of that process as opposed to the front.
The process for the plan update was I mean, it was a long one. I think we probably had most of the land use map in place in 2016, probably. So we probably had that piece, and then there was a lot of other pieces that just kept. I mean, the end of 2016, the planning commission was done and had sent it to city council. City council I had 20 meetings, 21, 22 meetings with city council, hearings to go through the plan, the new zoning in 2017. So planning commission was done in 2016, and this part of it may have been done 2015, early 2016, because a lot of time was spent on what are the additional changes we want to make to PUDs and to site plan and all of these other requirements. So this was actually done fairly early in the process.
Okay.
I guess the other clarification, just the other piece the 90% rule gave is that it actually targeted to the most to allow more room for growth. So let's say we're talking about front setbacks, and let's say you have a street with 20 houses on it, and 15 of them have a 10-foot setback, and 3 of them have a 7-foot setback, and 2 of them have a 5-foot setback. Well, the setback for that district is set at 90%, which is either going to be the 5 or the 7, depending on how the planning commission wanted to draw the line on that one. So most of the houses are 10 foot. The setback is actually at 7 or 5. So even in building the 90%, it was giving room for growth because most of those properties had additional room they could do more stuff on, because it only took a handful of properties to, I've got a 10-foot setback because I'm a pretty standard house, but actually my setback in this district is 5 because that's where it came out. So there is actually a little bit more elbow room because of that 90% rule. But yes, it was just the metric that we used and how we got there. But that was one of the things we were happy with because we wanted to get more infill potential, but we were having a hard time pushing this rock up the hill. And that was how we were kind of like, well, at least a 90% gives us some elbow room, especially when it comes to density, because we would look at single family home. We just needed 3 duplexes in a neighborhood to be like, duplexes are in because that's 90%. And there we go. So that was, and that was where a lot of these little bit more elbow room fit in because of that.
Okay. And the reason why I asked that question is because I just wanted, my understanding, just in the handful of smaller map revisions that I've been a part of since being on the commission, they tend to be fairly contentious. I would assume that the the larger revision of the map in 2017, 2016, that was probably fairly contentious. And I just want to make sure that is my thinking is, and I don't know if I'm right about this, is I would imagine that most folks, when they are looking at a revised map, they're looking at where their home is on that map, and they want to know, the core question is what can I do here? And my concern is, and I think this is a good idea, and I think it's a good exercise, but I think we do need to be cognizant of if we don't have an answer for folks to say, this is what you can do here because this is shaded red, or this is shaded blue. You are in this district. If we don't have the answer, this is exactly what you can do in this area when we propose this, it might get a little fraught. And I'm not suggesting that I think it is a good idea to take a look at this map so that we can conceptually understand what it is we want the city to look like. But I think my suggestion is start thinking about how do we sequence our work so that we are able to answer the question, what can you do at your property under this revised map when we put it out for public comment, as opposed to sort of like getting the map set in stone, getting all that input, and then sort of backfilling it. And I think there's easy ways to do that. My thought is like, I just remember anytime you start messing with these lines, people start, they get very interested, and rightfully so. So,
one of the things we could do that's different, like in the past, we've gone through and done these sort of red lines, then we have like that formal public input. We could do something more like what we did with the city plan. So let's say we started with the map, for example, to get that kind of input early on to see what's going to be really challenging. Like, let's have a public listening session early, right? Like, and get some feedback so that we're not running too far down, like rewriting a whole bunch of text when it's like, well, whoa, there's going to be a bunch of opposition. The other piece, I think, as we look at the map, Maria, I like your suggestion. I like the hybrid. I like starting with a map. I do think we need to think about, and it may be that we're just going to keep things the same, but the design review district is also the piece that seems to be really contentious. And so are we going to shrink it? Is it going to stay the same? I know there's been suggestions that we expand it. I'm not in favor of that, but I think that goes along with the map is because those are hey, you have to have, this historic thing has to be preserved, or you're building a new structure and it sort of has to look similar to the one next to it. So
I would assume, I was always thinking that historic or design review would be part of that broader rejiggering of the map. I think you're right too. It's a pretty contentious place.
I'm just gonna offer up a tool because I don't know how many of the planning commissioners have gone on and used the Access GIS mapping that has the zoning overlay. You can access it through the planning department or the assessor's website. If you haven't played around with that, feel free to call either Nick or myself just to do some walkthroughs. We can do a Zoom, or you can come into the office on how to adjust the layers so that you can like increase and decrease the current zoning layers so that you can see through them and see the satellite imagery below of houses and green space and like all of that stuff that might help you, so you have something that is maneuverable while you're then looking at what are the current standards, where do we want to change it, what's there right now, as well as being able to also then compare that with the use table in a way that I find a lot easier than just looking at a static printed out map. So if somebody hasn't used it or needs help on figuring out how to do all the playing around with the layers, either Nick Gothier or I can help you with that. Of course, anytime. Just let us know.
Thanks, Meredith.
It also has the flood layers in it.
Oh. Sure, Steve.
On that topic, if you're gonna propose changing setbacks in existing zones or even changing the shape of the zones, the access tool can allow you it can be set up to pop up a little box that'll say under existing, this is what the restrictions would be, under the proposed, this is what the restrictions. So anybody could click on any parcel and see how they would compare now and then. That would be a really useful tool.
Oh, you mean if we created a proposed
Yeah.
layer and put it in there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really good tool to respond to, Aaron's, my parcel, what am I gaining or losing? But anticipating accessory dwelling. But I also want to push back on one thing that Maria said about that's not our lane. Under statute, capital budgeting is your lane. And I would ask you to give some thought to teaming up, having the council authorize you teaming up with Complete Streets, and we build a financial model into these zones such that a proposed pipe extension to handle, 4 more units down here is going to cost X. So it basically creates a ongoing model that allows everybody to predict what infill development would actually cost, and Public Works could put their input as this is how long it would take till we could get to that. But that's really how to manage, going forward, is to tie that capital budgeting. That's gonna need a new crosswalk. Crosswalks cost about this. Every foot of sidewalk costs about this. So that's the reason capital budgeting is under the Planning Commission. It's because your plan doesn't really get realized if you don't put dollars to it that everybody else buys into. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So it sounds like there's a bit of a consensus that's starting to warm up around this idea that we take a look at the map at the front end. Am I making that up, or is that?
No, I feel very comfortable with that.
Okay, so great. I think that's a good way to start. So I guess the brass tacks question is, how do we sort of shift our focus to that piece in the short term? Sounds like Rowan, you had some questions about, wanting to understand sort of the historical underpinnings of all this. What's there, Mike? Is that a presentation that you feel comfortable giving in a little more?
Or if there's any specific questions along the way, I can certainly answer questions as they go as to why is that particular thing. I can try to answer as best I can. In some cases, it just is because that's what the consultant proposed, and we haven't edited it, and that's sometimes that's just the answer, but in some cases there's a very specific reason.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what's the most beneficial sort of labor efficient way to get this ball moving.
I'm sorry.
I'm just on the historical bit. If there's just documents that I can read, I'm just not sure what to look for, honestly. But I can also do that research myself and just come informed and prepared to ask any additional questions.
It depends what you're.
Yeah, I think it would depend.
It's basically, we lost almost everything that was paper.
You'll need your microphone.
Yeah, sorry, we lost almost everything that was paper in the flood. We used to have like a book that showed, and it was annotated about everything that changed. So we have, like, are you looking for the historical maps? What exactly are you looking for? If you wanted, because we can try and find some of it. I have some of the historic maps just on the server and things like that. And I think Mike has maybe you had a timeline of certain changes that you created at one point since the flood. But I mean, there's reams, or there's summaries, or there's
I think what I'm
maps.
looking for to start is probably summaries to go along with maps. Really, what I'm trying to understand is what and why. So these changes were made in 2018. That's fantastic, but I was thinking even a little bit earlier than that. So maybe I just need to do like a history of zoning generally in Vermont, and when zoning started in Montpelier, for example. But I really want to know, how it started, why we are where we are, and then what does the future look like if we want to have X amount of people, then how many houses do we need to have, and what kind of zoning do we need to have for that kind of thing? So it's really the historical context and that sort. But since you're the expert, I would also recommend you tell me what I need to know.
Yeah, I mean,
because I don't know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, if we're looking at getting into the nitty gritty of how we got the zoning that we have, probably some of the better things. You see these, we did these matrices, and we could try to connect you up to the ones that we had for the planning commission, and you can just go see what were the recommendations and all the changes. But it means pages and pages, but it really is something, if you're interested in a particular piece, you can go in and try to say, all right, where is the comments on 3203, and then kind of understand these were the questions, these were the staff recommendations, these were the planning commission decisions on certain topics. But I mean, big picture, we've had zoning, if anyone doesn't want, any interested, 1947 was our first set of zoning regulations. It was mostly just in our downtown. And from that point, there weren't many changes until about 1973, and that's kind of when things started to blow up and move, and then things started to go. There was some big state law changes in 68, and that was kind of pushing some communities to start doing more
federal law
planning.
changes too.
So yeah, so we worked through from 73, there was a bunch, and then significant change in the mid 1980s. So a whole rewrite mid 1980s that was then amended in 1990s. They went through a lot of iterations, and then probably about the mid 90s, the late 90s, things kind of stopped, and then there were no changes for a long period of time. And that was why in about, I guess, in 2010, after the 2010 master plan had been adopted, that the planning commission said, now we're ready to do a zoning update because it hasn't been changed in a while. And they did jumped in and said, we're just going to throw out the old zoning and start all over from scratch. And that took 7 years to kind of work its way through to the document we have today. So, I mean, big picture, those were the changes. But like I said, I think one of the things I really liked about the approach our consultant took, there are things I could disagree with her on, but the things I thought she did great on was the development of matrices. Anytime we public comment, commission comment, they all just went in the matrix, and they were coded, and that way you could go through and say, no, we looked at them, and these are the staff comments, and these are the planning commission decisions. And it's probably also why it took so long, because the more comments we get, the more times we had to go through that. But I can certainly get you connected, get those sent to you, and then that would give you at least a taste of some of the more detailed decisions. I don't know if we still have the old drafts of the zoning, and I don't know if that would really help you much, but.
You can also send a couple of the oldest maps.
And I just wanted to go and say, I think Meredith and I kind of recognized that this process was going to be different. And that was a little bit of why we weren't bringing to you. Normally, as Aaron points out, we would be bringing you the strikeout and saying, these are the changes we think that need to be made. We're going to explain to you why it's important to make these edits and changes. And then you guys can tell us what you would like adjusted. In this case, we've kind of come to you to say, and I had an email from somebody who asked, is like, well, can I get a copy of the strikeout version? I'm like, well, there isn't one right now. So that's the answer to the question, because we're still waiting, and maybe that's the next agenda item, a little bit of 7, is starting to say, we wanted to come to you with questions to start going through and say, okay, this is what we heard, and you're talking to people, we're talking to people. Would this be something that you want to change? And really was giving an opportunity for you all as a group to say yes. We've all talked about merging residential 1500 and residential 3000. We can't do that until you guys all say, yes, Mike and Meredith, go and do that, put that on the draft map. And then we can talk about, okay, well, here's what that means. What would you like to do with the fact that Res 1500 has no parking requirement. Res 3000 has a parking requirement. Now, that's just a fact. You have to sort out, okay, when we merge them, are we merging them and not having a parking requirement, or are we merging them and having a parking requirement? And that's your decision to make. And we can talk about our experience in the past. And as we said, it's really hard. A lot of times what I've tried to do in the past is to try to gauge where we talk, we go to the public, and then we get absolutely bashed for our recommendations. So sometimes I kind of come in and try to go, all right, let's think about how this is going to, and lately it's been kind of the other point of view, the developers have done a very good job of coming forward and saying, no, that these are important changes, and their opinions have carried the day, where they haven't in the past. And so I think now we're going to be just having a different conversation about, okay, what do we want to do? There may be consequences. We may hear about this, but at least you've known up front. Parking historically has been a huge topic. And especially if you're talking about a neighborhood that has on-street parking issues, that is a big issue for those communities, whether it's over by the elementary school or on Berry Street. It's a thing. But I think we're in a different place. And so I think we're willing to work with you to just kind of open up and say, this is what it is, and we can keep working together to try to work through the matrix of changes. And if you've got things to add, we will add them to the matrix. So that way, and the matrix is really here to make sure that we've captured that. And if it comes back up later on, we can say, actually, we talked about that on number 17 and we voted no, but you're welcome to revisit it. But that was the decision. Otherwise, we can sometimes get spinning our wheels. I say that because it took 7 years to do the zoning. We want to just try to make sure if we get to a point, we make decisions, if a majority of people say, let's revisit that, then let's revisit that. Otherwise, with a big change, and that's what we're talking about, let's make big changes. We have to make decisions and move and just keep watching. And if it says, let's revisit that, then let's revisit it. But we want to make sure we don't get stuck in one place either.
Well, we'll definitely try to keep this one under 5 years. 10 at the most, so we'll see what we can do. Okay, I don't, it sounds like we've got a good sort of idea, we've got a good start here. I'm just wondering if there's anything specific that we should be focusing on for the next meeting, to kind of move our focus towards this map, if anybody has any suggestions about that. And
we had started like a couple weeks ago, our last meeting, I think before I kind of asked us to adopt the principles, so we knew what those were, we had started like just diving in, and I'm wondering if we just pick a couple of these like things on the map that are close together that we all want to look at, so we've all read it ahead of time. Because we started doing, I think we were looking at downtown, right? We started kind of looking at that. Maybe there's some of those you want to identify that we all come prepared to talk about next time.
Sure. Okay, so let's do this. If this makes sense to folks, maybe just be a good idea, piggybacking on what Gabe just said, is take a look at the map. If there are specific questions commissioners have about the map, let's get them together in advance of the next meeting. You can go ahead and email those to me. We can get a list together and make that an agenda item and just start going through that list and really start getting a better understanding of the map and sort of what we're really grappling with. I think this will be a bit of a free flowing discussion, but I think that's good right now so that people can really wrap their heads around what we're trying to achieve here going forward for the next 5 to 10 years. I'm joking.
Be quoted in the bridge.
And I am joking. It is a joke. It is a joke. Is that
it's a really good idea. I wonder if we want to set up any sort of initial guidelines for us, like are we all in favor of consolidation, or should we not limit it at all and just say send us your questions? Do we want to guide and focus at all prior to the next time we meet?
I mean, I think we could probably answer some of those big questions right now. Just get a sense of to kind of calibrate where we're going. I mean, is there, I'll just put it out to the group. Is there an appetite amongst this group to explore consolidating the zoning districts and reducing those numbers to sort of streamline, zoning in town? Is that
Yes.
Yes.
okay?
I think it's good to sort of like set the
Thumbs up is.
Are there any sort of other kind of big conceptual kind of lead that we want to follow as we sort of dive into this map that people want to put on the table right now to sort of see what the temperature of the group is?
One thing I would say about consideration, And Mike talked about Sabins and that they tried to make it a, to make it a continuous district, and city council shot them down. But I I was thinking in some of my thoughts about this, that Sabins had popped into my head, CCR property as well, that they're these big lots that are cut up into different districts. And so to think about, the future of those lots that are have a lot of development potential, and for 20 years from now, like what should we be zoning them now to make that future vision come true, potentially?
Yeah, one of the things that Sean had pointed out to me is that in the Crestview area, the 11-2, this is undeveloped, but it's currently zoned for what is it, res 9,000 there. So, just because a lot of Country Club Road and Siemens Pasture is currently zoned as rural, I think we could work together and work with other folks to sort of figure that out for what we want that to be in the future.
Ron, did you have something?
Forgive my ignorance if this is somewhere that I just missed, but does the city have a idea of how many more houses like the city itself wants to have in 10, 20, 15 years? And if
We do.
okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where can I find that list so I can just make sure that I'm on the same page so we can understand where those houses might go?
It's in the housing chapter of the city plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just say very, very directly that it's 1,500 housing units over the next 20 years, which is 75 per year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's it?
That's it. And we have not come close to that
Okay.
in the past 20 to 30 years.
Okay.
And at the moment, we are probably averaging 10 to 15, maybe.
Do we want to make that number higher?
We that's a good question. We debated that a lot. We sort of went back and forth, and we said, do we want to come up with a number? And that's the place that we ended up.
Okay.
Yes, that's the one that was adopted,
Okay.
but in the city plan and approved by city council.
Okay. Thank you. Helpful
So
to know.
1,500, just on average, every household has about 2 residents. So 1,500 units is about 3,000 more people in town. We're a town of 8,000, so it would be, if we meet that target, that would be I don't know, can't do the math in my head, 30% increase in the population. So compared to where we've been, it would be quite a push. But we do have the utilities, the sewer capacity, water capacity, and we would probably have to increase police and fire to accommodate that a bit, but the other services are already able to accommodate that amount. So
Thank you.
And this is really where, in my opinion, zoning regulations come in, because if we're looking at 1,500, that can't just simply be Crestview. If that happens at some point in the future, Siemens Pasture and Country Club Road, new developments. It also includes, in my opinion, a lot of infill. There isn't a ton of infill that's currently possible with our dimensional standards. And so I think that this is a huge opportunity for us to assist with the especially the infill housing development.
Okay. My question stemmed from the general number of individuals, workforce growth that we need to have across the state, and making Vermont an economically viable place to be in 20 years. And then my last question is, can I find a list of the definitions for all the jargon online so that I can make sure I come to the meetings informed about what we're talking about?
What jargon is in particular?
Pretty much everything.
All of it.
I mean, I can understand it from context, but I think it'd be really helpful. And maybe that's something I can take on, but once I have definitions, I think it should be made public as well. Like if we can post to the page that if folks are tuning in, then they have no idea what infill means or mixed use or design review district in this context, then it'd be really helpful to have that for the public too.
Towards the end of the zoning regulations, there's a definitions chapter, which probably captures a lot of that, maybe not all of it, but also at times where anyone that has questions, and I still have a lot of questions, I think we should feel very free to ask and not bashful.
You can always email me.
Or even in this setting, I think
Yeah, either.
because some people join and but people do listen to these afterwards as well. And if this is just full of jargon without definitions, I think that's tough, and it can be super helpful for the public.
Yeah, I mean, that's one reason I'm attending all of these. Maybe not all of them, but
Yeah, your infill is trying to avoid going out to the green fields. So you'll take an existing house or an existing property that might be a single family or a duplex and add additional units either into that or into additional buildings on that property. So as opposed to looking at Country Club Road, Sabins Pasture, Crestview would not be infill housing. Those are new housing in green fields. As opposed to going to an existing neighborhood and buying a single family home and turning it into a duplex or a quadplex. Your mixed use is just in typical, using more jargon, Euclidean, the zoning districts that a lot of communities across the country have, they're broken into very discrete commercial, industrial, residential, and it's shocking how you just don't have any mixed uses. But in the East Coast, we still have a lot of these historic neighborhoods, and all of our zoning districts, most of our zoning districts are mixed use or allow a certain amount of mixed uses. So you can have a certain amount of commercial or small industrial. And so, but we have certain districts called like the mixed use residential and riverfront, which are really mixed use. You go down Berry Street and you have a pizzeria and you have an apartment building. You wouldn't see that out west because the pizzeria you'd have to get in your car to drive to, and it would be on a strip with a whole bunch of other pizzerias and restaurants, and your residential developments over here with just residential developments. So having a mix within a neighborhood is just a little bit more New England, and it makes for better neighborhoods. But there are certain cases where it doesn't make sense. You wouldn't necessarily want to have that on, Liberty Street, where that's just allowed to be residential. So that's what we get when we're talking about mixed uses. But yes, we'll try. If you need any explanations along the way, just let me know, because if you're asking, there's probably somebody else out there asking too.
Just to put a plug in, thank you, Meredith, for that comment about the GIS. I've never used it. I've used it for looking at individual lots, but you put the layers in there.
Yeah.
It's really good for
Yeah,
us to
thank
do,
Nick.
because you can see what the neighborhoods sort of look like. And then there's also, you can drop a layer of topography. So if you want to see like, hey, there are probably reasons that this stuff is the way it is, because there's a bunch of hills there.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We want to move on to topic 8 yet, or 7, because I guess the new topic 8. That is, the matrix is about the zoning districts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I just wanted, let me just bring this full circle. So unless I hear, let me ask the group. Does it make sense to sort of take a look at the maps, really just generate a list of questions? I think it'd be helpful if you just send them to me before next meeting. We can put it in a gigantic big list, have that as an agenda item so we can all have a common list to come from. Also, feel free to bring questions to the next meeting. We'll just start working through some of these issues that we've laid out to start working through that map.
When do you need them by, so that it gets in the agenda for the public?
I would just say by like usually next Wednesday would probably be the latest, but I'll send out an email early in next week or a week after that.
Yeah, we'll just have to see because like I said, I don't know what we're doing for
Oh, yeah, that's
the next
right.
meeting.
Mike might not be available, so we might.
No, I might not. I won't be.
Yeah, he will not be available, so I will be it if we're having the meeting, and I will not be. Don't come to me with big policy planning stuff. I don't have any of that training.
Okay.
I am happy to have you guys all talk
Yep.
and then come up with these are the things we want to see. And I can jot that down and then go back because Nick will have to do any changes to the map. Mike and I can do changes to underlying things to be like, okay, if we merge these two, here are the questions that come out of it, that type of stuff. But if you have big policy questions, if you get them to Mike before he leaves, then I can bring his answers to the meeting, but I can't really discuss them with you.
TBD. We'll figure this out, but I'll send an email to the group letting them know like what the
Assuming
deadline.
we're meeting, you would want them by Wednesday.
So, yeah, but again, I'll send out an email to the group. I need to talk to Mike offline to see what's going on with the next meeting.
Okay.
Questions and ideas, like thoughts that we have, just
Full
brainstorming
spectrum. Yeah, I
for the map and districts.
Yep.
I mean, we have a bigger matrix than this of all the comments that came in way early through this whole process. So even if you have questions and comments that come up that don't quite fit into the next round of discussion you want, I would say throw them out there because we can add those to discussion later on to check them off of, did we already address this? If not, let's revisit it when we get to whatever section it fits into.
Great.
Like, I'd rather make sure we catch everybody's ideas when they come out, and not miss them later on because somebody forgot about it.
And lastly, just before we change gears, Sean, I just wanted to, we should probably touch base at some point because I feel like this is a good issue to kind of put in front of city council and kind of just start getting that communication with them, sort of let them know what we're up to and sort of get their sense of if they have any concerns or questions that they want us to address in this process, but we can do that later. Otherwise I'd forget to say it. So, all right, unless anybody has anything else, I suggest we move to our next agenda item. Number 8, discussing the amendments to the regulations based on the commission's guiding principles. Zoning district consolidation as a starting point and review staff recommendations and changes.
I almost recommend we just table this until after our map discussion.
Yeah, I mean, these are map issues.
Yeah.
They're all either map or stuff that goes into the district's questions because they were.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, and we can bring this home with ourselves and use that as some inspiration too for thinking about additional questions and brainstorming ideas.
Yep, and that's all fair. I just wanted to see if folks had any questions about the matrix. Is it sitting in front of them right now?
Mhm.
I don't.
If we got a minute, maybe Mike, you could tell us about this gasoline alley.
It's the area that's starts at Memorial Drive. You've got the gas station, the house, another gas station, Domino's, another gas station, Dunkin' Donuts. So there's that stretch there that kind of goes through that part of lower Berlin Street. And
I've
it's
got
always
some
kind of been a
maps.
funky place. But the weird part is that area is the same zoning district as Berry Street.
Mhm.
And we've kind of always said, usually you try to group things in similar places. And this is just kind of an odd, nothing on Memorial Drive. Not saying there's anything wrong with what's in this area. It just doesn't match similar character with what's in Berry Street. This is really kind of a leftover from what was the Riverfront District under the old zoning. That was one of the districts that kind of survived. It's why it's one that has its own name because that's what it was before. and people wanted to keep it. And functionally, there are different areas within this that don't work the same. So you can look at that gasoline alley. And one of the questions, and this came up in 2017 when we were having the discussion, one was, well, what do we want the future to look like here? Maybe we don't want this to be gas stations and convenience stores. And that's a good point. We should zone this to be what we expect it to be. And the other question is, what can we reasonably, rationally expect this to be going forward? So yes, we'll have that. We can have that conversation of, do we just kind of accept that we have this stretch of 10 properties that we're going to treat in this way? But I think if we went through and did it, we'd probably talk a little bit about that section, what's over on the other side. And then even once we get to the Berry Street side, we also have Stonecutters Way. So the buildings on Stonecutters Way are significantly different. They're the big nature conservancy, these big, you just don't see those on Berry Street. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just, again, they're not residential, they're all commercial. And are they really the same zoning district? We really should talk about, what do we expect Berry Street to be?
Mhm.
And I think what Berry Street will be in the future is likely going to be different what Stonecutters Way is going to be in the future. And Caledonia Spirits, again, Caledonia Spirits was built in the Riverfront District, which is the same district as all the apartment buildings on Berry Street. It's just a matter of, let's make sure we scale, and when we're talking about things, we're like, this is okay because of X, and not a little bit of the history. So that's some of what we're talking about when we talk about Gasoline Alley. And yes, that creates a few more districts, but maybe in the end we go through and realize, yeah, but this is this, but maybe is it similar enough to what's going on in the Eastern Gateway that we can go through and say, how different is this than Tractor Supply and that stretch? Should these be the same district, even though they're not really near each other? It's a question.
Yep.
And I think Sean has a question.
Yeah, well, I would just like to say about the gasoline alley stuff that, and broader also, rather than creating bespoke districts for these outliers, to look and see where the similarities are that we can merge. For me, it makes sense for Gasoline Alley to be part of the Gateway. Gateway's largely commercial at both ends. That it seems to make a lot of sense to me to merge that into Gateway.
Alan.
Thank you. I think you're all really on the right track. I would just ask one thing. If you do break things up, choose a different name. Gasoline Alley does not make me feel good. That makes me think, oh my goodness, I want to go the other way. I think Mike and you all are on the right track, but maybe you could come up with a better name. Thank you.
I would not recommend naming it. That just is what we've affectionately referred to it in the planning department, but that would not be an official name in the zoning regulation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Something I want to just put out there also in terms of my beginning of a thought with Gasoline Alley is that we do have, houses and residential and commercial in very close proximity. And this, instead of it being like, oh, Gasoline Alley, like maybe this is the model of, what we need is businesses and houses close together. So anyways, just a beginning seed of an idea, but that is different than, the gateway discussion that we were talking about. But for me, this could be something not to try to conform into something else, but as a an example of what already exists and what we can promote in other parts of the city.
Is residential allowed in Gateway?
In
Yeah.
Gateway.
Yes.
Yep. Residential is allowed pretty much everywhere in some form or another. I think the only zoning district it's not allowed is probably municipal.
Just parks and cemeteries.
Yeah. Hubbard Park.
Was that everything, Alan, or your hand is still up? Your virtual hand is still up?
Yes, no, I was just going to say, that's a wonderful point, Commissioner, and that's exactly what we call smart growth walkability. So we're trying so hard to have some mixed use. So yes, rather than gasoline alley, we should be thinking of walkability community or something along that line. Thank you.
I asked about the Western Gateway. What is the? It looks like National Life. Is it larger than National Life?
Yes. So we've got National Life, and then you also have the properties that are down the high school and the liquor control and those that are kind of off Green Mountain Drive. And it actually includes
The
the
state buildings down there, Department of Labor.
Department of Labor is down there, and it includes the bank. East Rise is also in that district. And the purpose of the two gateways, and maybe this makes a good point for that stretch we were just talking about, of the gas stations and convenience stores, is if we looped it into the gateway as was suggested, one or the other gateway. I mean, the purpose of the gateways is to try to manage growth from an aesthetics standpoint. There used to be design review regulations, which were applied to each one of the gateway districts. They weren't well constructed, so they didn't make it into the 2018 zoning, but there used to be more design considerations for those districts. And that's so when we start talking about that stretch of buildings, it's like, that's great. We accept the fact that we're going to have gas stations. We still have cars that have gas. We're going to have gas stations. We're going to have convenience stores, but it's still a gateway. And this is still the entrance to our town. And we need to make sure that we manage these areas. So more landscaping requirements and looking at these to make sure that we're putting a good face on for our visiting public as they come in. That was a lot of the intent of these gateway districts. Whether you're coming in on Route 302 or whether you're coming in on the highway, we're gonna have this attractive landscape. I don't think we've accomplished that goal, but that was the intent of these areas going forward. I don't, certain buildings have come out. I think East Rise is a very nice building. The high school is there. That's good. But I think a lot of the other buildings, I don't think have necessarily risen to our, what we were hoping and aspiring to when these were created in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, that's when they were built. That's when these gateways.
The western and eastern gateways, probably the 80s, I would say. That was probably the revisions that went through in the 80s, were the ones that were really starting to talk about, because the highway came through in 73-ish.
I want to say it was also probably a consolidation of those services that might be helping to support people coming in off the highways. I mean, that is the only place, those two districts right now are the only places you can have a car wash, a gas station, like any new gas station, auto repair service, automobile sales or rental establishments, lumber yards or building material sales. So for new buildings, that would be Eastern Gateway, or there's also Riverfront allows some of those. But those are really Riverfront, Eastern Gateway, and then Western Gateway has some things that only that it has more of. But there's a bunch of automobile repair stuff. It's Riverfront, Eastern Gateway, or Western Gateway, but definitely Eastern Gateway, where you let those things happen. And there's more allowance for industrial and some of those as well, especially the Eastern Gateway. So that's where you can have like large warehouses or tank farms, things like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would definitely look at the maps in correlation with the use tables that tried to capture some of the things that were there that maybe you didn't want spreading into more heavily residential areas, but you still want to allow new residential in these spaces that in some cases have big open parcels.
Right.
But it may not be conducive to dense residential like the downtown.
Looks like Peter has a comment.
Peter.
I actually have a question. I live in Mountain View, which is a kind of a stepchild of the Gateway. Northfield Street is also, it's a southern gateway, if you will, not okay, but we're right up against National Life all around us. I National Life surrounds my house. What's the thought about Northfield Street? Because there's been a lot of conversation about um, some further developments on Northfield Street, and it seems logical. Mike?
I guess that depends on it's currently the lower part from Mountain View on down is mixed use residential, mostly because that's somewhat what is in existence right now. And then as you continue to head out on Northfield, it's all residential 9,000 it looks like. So there's a lot of infill potential in those areas. Obviously, certain things like Colonial Drive has been built out, but there are other areas that certainly have additional land that could allow for more growth. And with the new zoning that we have now, any single family home could be turned into a duplex or anything even up to a sixplex right now. So
Provided it's
Colonial
on,
Drive.
provided it's on sewer and water.
Yeah, provided sewer and water, and they've just updated the sewer line on that street and the water line, I believe. So I would think there'd be adequate services up at least till there's the top of the hill. I know it starts to dip down as you go down the other side, which would require a pump station. But I would think a majority of that's probably good for a certain amount of back to our infill. That would be in infill potential. Somebody would have to take a house. I don't know if there's room. Some of these, I'm looking at the size of the parcels. There may be some parcels big enough to subdivide, but most of them would probably end up being ones where they would just use more space to build more housing.
I think most of the smaller parcels up there would not be eligible for subdivision, but there's quite a few larger parcels that you could.
Yeah, I own a larger parcel that would, except that we don't have sewer and water.
Yeah, Mountain View has, there's doesn't have the extension of utilities, which is, yes, a separate conversation, but important conversation for certain areas of town.
Thanks.
Want to be mindful of the time. It's a little past 7:30. We can keep going if we want to, but
I think we're shifting into specifics right now. I think that would be lovely to bring this information with us to the next meeting.
I agree.
great. I'm looking for a specific motion.
I will motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
There we go.
All those in favor of adjourning? Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. This is a good discussion today.
Thank you, folks, for your help.